They said your worth was written in your bones. That destiny lived in the animal beneath your skin. That the weak would rise, the patient would be rewarded, that the truth always floated up like cream to the top of the milk. Every story promised it. Every grandmother whispered it over the fire on cold nights. But nobody tells you the other thing. Nobody tells you what happens when you're standing in a hall full of wolves who can tear through iron with their teeth. And you are the only one whose bones will never break into anything at all. Then you learn a different lesson. Some of us were never meant for the fairy tale. My name is Ilawan. I was 23 years old the night they asked me to sing. And I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. They didn't ask because they wanted beauty. They didn't ask because they craved music. They asked because cruelty, when you wrap it in laughter, doesn't leave a mark that anyone can see. Let me take you back. The Alpha King was coming. First time in 10 years. An inspection tour, they called it, though everyone in the pack knew what the words really meant underneath. Our Alpha was weak. Our borders were contested. And the king was riding out to decide whether we deserved to keep breathing as our own pack, or whether we'd be swallowed whole into stronger territory, our bloodlines scattered like ash on the wind. The whole pack had been polishing itself for weeks, the unmated females most of all, practicing their walks, their smiles, the soft submissive tilt of the throat, because everyone had heard the rumor, and the rumor had teeth. The king had no Luna, no mate, and a wolf without a mate is a wolf half-made. Even a king, especially a king. I wasn't part of the preening, I was part of the furniture. Because in a world where your wolf tells everyone what you're worth, where the animal inside you decides whether you are the hunter or the hunted, I was something worse than prey. I was no one at all. 23 years old, and I had never shifted. Never once felt my bones crack and rearrange into something wild. Never tasted the cold copper joy of running on 4 legs instead of 2. Omega, they called me, and even that was generous, because Omegas were still wolves. Omegas still had an animal sleeping somewhere in their soul. I just had silence. The healers had examined me when I was small. Cold hands on my spine, my skull pressing, searching for the blockage, the defect, the reason. They found nothing, which of course meant everything was wrong. My wolf wasn't sleeping. My wolf wasn't trapped behind a locked door. She simply wasn't there. And in a pack built on fang and claw, on the pure ladder of who could dominate whom, a girl without a wolf was less than useless. She was an insult stitched into the family name. My father never forgave me for it. Aldous, the pack beta, the alpha's right hand, his voice at the war table, his fist when a fist was needed. He never forgave the failure to shift, never forgave the humiliation of a broken only child. But there was one thing he forgave even less, because the healers had found something else that day. A second thing, delivered flat the way you'd read a weather report. My womb was scarred, collapsed. Whether from the same twist of blood that ate my wolf, or from some separate joke the moon goddess thought was funny, the ending was the same. I would never carry a child. Never hold a pack's future warm in my belly. Never do even the one thing a female wolf was supposed to be able to do without thinking. So the word they hung on me was not one word, but 2. And in our world, both of them meant the same thing: disposable. My father's solution had a certain terrible elegance to it. Keep her hidden. So I lived in the narrow gap between being seen and being sent away. I washed the dishes. I carried the water. I ate my meals in the kitchen with the old ones and the sick ones, and the ones nobody wanted at the high table. I was allowed to exist, as long as I never reminded anyone that I did. And here's the thing that will surprise you. I had made my peace with it. Or at least I had learned to bury the grief so deep in my chest that I could breathe around the edges of it. I had my chores. I had my voice, though nobody knew that yet. And at night in the small cold room at the far end of the pack house, I had my stories. I wrote fairy tales. Isn't that the saddest thing you ever heard? A girl the world had thrown away, hunched over a candle, writing tales of curses broken, and love that saw past the surface, and happy endings handed out to the ones nobody expected. All the things I would never, ever have. I'd fill the pages and hide them under my mattress like they were treasure, like they were contraband. They were mine. That was enough. The night the king arrived, I'd been put on kitchen duty, scrubbing pots, arranging the serving trays, kept far, far away from the great hall where the actual pack would dine with royalty. And I was grateful for it, because the less they saw me, the less they could hurt me. That was the whole arithmetic of my life. Stay small, stay quiet, stay out of the light. Except then, Seraphine found me. Seraphine, my half-sister, my father's true child born of his true mate. Beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Crowned by a silver wolf so lovely that grown males whimpered when she walked past. She was everything I was not, and she had spent the whole of our 2 lives making very sure I understood the gap between us. There you are. Her voice was honey poured over broken glass. She stood in the kitchen doorway wearing a dress worth more than I'd see in a year, her dark hair swept up to bare the smooth, unmarked gland at her throat. Father wants you in the great hall. My hands went still in the gray dishwater. Why? Her smile was a beautiful, terrible thing. The king asked for entertainment, something local, something authentic. She studied her nails, each one painted the exact red of fresh blood. Father thought you might sing for us. The old cook beside me sucked in a sharp breath. I felt the cold crawl down my spine, one vertebra at a time. Seraphine. It isn't a request, Eloan. My name in her mouth sounded like something spat out. Unless you'd rather Father explain to the Alpha King why his Beta's daughter refused a direct command during a royal visit. She didn't need to say the rest. We both knew what refusing meant. Insubordination in front of the crown. Execution if he was in a foul mood. Exile if he was feeling generous. And a woman like me turned loose alone in the wild territories wouldn't last a week. I'll need to change. I started looking down at my kitchen dress gray with grease and soap and the day. No time. Her eyes dragged over me, slow, delighted. Besides, authenticity. Remember, we wouldn't want you looking like you belonged with the real pack. 20 minutes later, I stood at the edge of the great hall, with my heart slamming against my ribs like something trying to get out. The room was magnificent. Vaulted ceilings painted with the whole long history of our kind. Tables groaning under roasted meat and bright fruit, and everywhere, the smell of power. Wolves in the shape of men and women, but only barely. I could feel their animals pressing against the inside of their skin, straining, listening. I could feel the constant silent measuring the hierarchy sorting and resorting itself with every glance. And at the head of the room, him. Alpha King Torvald Ashgrove. I'd seen the paintings, heard the descriptions carried mouth to mouth like weather. Nothing prepared me for the actual weight of him in a room. I wasn't handsome, not in the way the word usually means. His face was too hard, too angular, like someone had carved a king out of granite and forgotten to soften the edges. His hair was black as a wet raven, pulled back off a face that looked like it had forgotten the shape of a smile years ago. His eyes were pale, the color of the sky an hour before a bad storm. Every wolf in that hall was turned toward him without meaning to be. The way a field of flowers turns toward the sun. I was terrifying, and he was looking straight at me. Ah, there she is. My father's voice boomed across the hall, warm and false as a painted smile. Your Majesty, may I present my daughter Elowen? She has a certain talent for music. The king's expression did not move, not one muscle. We thought our own alpha cut, in throwing my father a little conspiratorial grin, that His Majesty might enjoy the Luna hymn. Traditional, you see. Sung at matings, at coronations, a sacred piece. Someone snickered. The sound rippled out through the hall like blood spreading in water. And I understood. The Luna hymn was sacred. It was sung only by mated females, only by Lunas and the highest-ranking she-wolves. It was a song about power and fertility and the moon goddess laying her blessing over a complete and holy union. Having me sing it. Me. Everything the song was not. It was a joke. They were going to make me stand up in front of a king and humiliate myself, and they were going to laugh. I looked at my father. His eyes held a single flat warning. Comply or be cast out. I looked at Seraphine. Her smile was radiant with joy. I looked at the king. His face was nothing at all. Blank. Waiting. My voice came out as barely a whisper. I would be honored, Your Majesty. Because what else was there to say? The hall went quiet. Someone dimmed the lamps because of course they did, because cruelty is always better with theater. And I stood there in my stained kitchen dress with my hair falling loose from its braid, and my hands shaking, and I opened my mouth to sing the one song in the whole world I had no right to sing. But here's what they didn't know. Here's the thing nobody had ever bothered to ask. I could sing, not carry a tune, not hum along by the fire. I mean the kind of singing that comes up from somewhere far below, training far below practice. The kind that rises up out of all the grief and the longing and the furious buried hope that a person swallows over 23 years until it turns into something else entirely. Something almost like magic. So I sang the Luna hymn, and I broke them all apart. The first note left my throat like a bird slipping out of a cage. I didn't sing it the way it was meant to be sung, all proud and blazing a Luna, claiming what was hers. I couldn't. That was never going to be my story. So instead I sang it the way it actually lived inside my chest. As a mourning. As a love letter to something I would never hold. Moon Mother, hear your daughter's cry. Bless the bond that will not die. My voice started soft, almost fragile. And I heard someone start to laugh, heard it die in their throat as the sound swelled and filled the great cavern of the hall with a fullness that should not have been possible from a body as small as mine. I'd never had a teacher, not one day, but I'd spent 23 years listening to the world with the terrible focus of someone who was never allowed to be part of it. I'd heard every note of every emotion a person could carry. And somewhere along the way, I had learned to give it all back. The hymn was supposed to sound triumphant. I made it ache. Grant us strength to face the night. Guard our young by Luna's light. I closed my eyes. because I couldn't bear to watch their faces remember why this was supposed to be funny. So I sank down into the music instead, into the cruel joke of singing about bonds I'd never feel, and children I'd never bear, and a love I would never once in my whole life be handed. And something happened in that hall. The laughter evaporated. The whispers died. The great hall dropped into a silence so complete I could hear my own heart. I could hear the candle flames guttering in their holders. I sang of the goddess blessing a mated pair. And I made it sound like a prayer from someone who already knew the answer would be no. The last note hung shimmering in the air, and then it was gone. I opened my eyes. The whole room was frozen. Wolves who had been snickering a minute ago were staring at me now, with something that looked a great deal like grief. Several of the mated females had tears running silent down their faces. Even my father looked uneasy, like a man who'd lit a small fire for fun, and was only now realizing he couldn't put it out. But it was the king who stopped my heart. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. His hands were locked around his silver goblet so hard, the metal had begun to fold. Dented, buckling under his grip, and his pale eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle up in goose flesh. He looked like a man who'd been struck by lightning, and was still deciding whether to fall or to burn. The silence stretched out long and bearable. Then he stood. The scrape of his chair against stone was deafening in that hush, and every single wolf in the hall dropped their eyes instantly to the floor. Submission, pure animal instinct. Every wolf except me. Because I'd never learned that instinct. I'd never had a wolf inside me to teach it. Nobody had ever whispered in my blood, "This predator is too dangerous, look away." So I looked back at him, and he walked toward me. My father started to rise, mouth already opening, probably to apologize, to explain that his defective daughter hadn't meant to silence. The king's voice was low, quiet, absolute. My father sat back down like he'd been struck across the face. The king stopped 3 feet from me. Up close, he was so much more. Tall enough that I had to tip my head back to hold his gaze. Broad enough to blot out the rest of the room. He smelled like cold forests and old snow, and something underneath it that made every human instinct I had scream one word: danger. "Who taught you to sing like that?" Not really a question. His voice was rough, like a man who hadn't used it for anything softer than a command in a very long time. "No one, Your Majesty." My own voice came out steady, which felt like a small miracle. "I taught myself." "Impossible." But he didn't sound angry. He sounded shaken. "That kind of skill requires training. It requires having nothing else." I said it before I could stop myself, and then I wanted to bite my own tongue out. You did not interrupt an alpha king. You did not contradict him. You did not. But he didn't kill me. He just stared, those pale eyes searching my face like he was hunting for one specific thing and couldn't quite find it. "You're the Beta's daughter." "Yes, Your Majesty." "But you haven't shifted." The whole room held its breath. And this was the moment. The moment I was supposed to lower my eyes in shame, apologize for the crime of existing, make myself as small as a person could get. Except I couldn't make myself any smaller. I'd already been living at the bottom of the world for 23 years. "No, Your Majesty." I lifted my chin. "I have no wolf." Something flickered over his face, too fast to name. "And yet," he said slowly, "you sang the Luna hymn like you understood every word of it, like you'd lived it." "I understand, longing, Your Majesty." The words spilled out of me, and I couldn't stop them. I understand wanting a thing you can never have. The hymn isn't about having everything. I swallowed hard. It's about hoping for it anyway. The silence that followed was different from all the ones before it. Charged. Humming. Then the king turned to my father. "I'm taking her." The hall erupted. My father shot to his feet. "Your Majesty, surely you don't, I'm aware of what she is." The king's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. His eyes had gone cold enough to freeze a river. "I'm also aware that you served her up to me as a joke, as entertainment." My father's face went the color of ash. "I'm claiming her as payment. For the insult. Payment, Your Majesty, please, I never intended. You intended to humiliate your own daughter for my amusement." The king's voice had gone soft, and somehow that was so much worse. "You succeeded only in showing me the shape of your own heart. Be grateful I don't demand something heavier." He turned back to me. "You'll come to the capital. You'll serve in the royal household." Not a request, a sentence. And I should have been terrified. I should have thrown myself at his feet and begged, should have wept for mercy. But all I felt rising up warm and strange and reckless inside my chest was relief. Because serving in the capital, even at the very bottom, even in disgrace, that meant thieving. Leaving this pack house where every single room held a memory of being turned away. Leaving my father, who looked at me like a stain he couldn't scrub out. Leaving Seraphine and her beautiful casual cruelty. "When do we leave, Your Majesty?" If my lack of protest surprised him, he didn't let it show. "Dawn. Bring nothing. You'll be provided for." Then he walked back to his seat, picked up his ruined goblet, and the whole thing was over. I walked out of that great hall on legs that didn't feel like mine. Behind me I could hear my father scrambling to save face. Hear the alpha stammering excuses. Hear Seraphine's sharp intake of breath, furious that her little joke had turned into a crown of thorns on my head instead of a noose. I didn't care. I went back to my small, cold room, and I sat on my narrow bed, and I looked at the four walls that had held me for 23 years. And I didn't pack. Because the king had said to bring nothing, and also because I had nothing worth bringing. My books were borrowed from the pack shelves. My clothes were cast-offs and kitchen aprons. The only things that were truly entirely mine were my stories. Pages and pages of handwritten fairy tales pulled out from under the mattress and cradled now in my lap. Years of desperate dreaming pressed into ink. I built a small fire in the little hearth, and I fed them to it one page at a time, and I watched them curl and blacken and disappear. Because I was leaving the fairy tales behind me. I was walking into something real, something unknown, and probably something terrible. But it would be different. And different was the only thing I'd ever wanted. Dawn came too quickly. And not quickly enough. The king's caravan filled the courtyard. Great horses stamping in the cold. Armed guards, supply wagons stacked with crates. The whole pack had turned out to bow and scrape and swear their loyalty as loud as they could. Not one of them looked at me. I wore the same kitchen dress from the night before because it was the cleanest thing I owned. My hair was braided down my back. I carried nothing at all. The king appeared in dark traveling leather weapons at his belt that looked well used and well loved. He barely glanced my way before jerking his chin at one of the wagons. "You'll ride with the supplies." Not with him, not even with the guards, with the crates. I climbed up into the wagon bed and settled myself down among sacks of grain and rolled canvas tents. The wood was hard, and splintered under me. It was going to be a miserable ride. I smiled anyway. Eloan. I looked up. My father stood beside the wagon, his face carefully arranged into nothing. You will behave with honor. You will not shame this pack any further. Not be safe. Not write to us. Not I'm sorry. Just don't embarrass us. Yes, father. He nodded once and walked away. Seraphine took his place, and for one strange moment her face was unreadable, and I thought foolishly that she might say something real, something a sister might say. I hope you know what you've done, she said quietly. The capital isn't kind to things like you. You'll be torn apart inside a week. Then I suppose I'll finally have something in common with you. My voice came out pleasant, almost light. We'll both know what it feels like to be destroyed by our own wanting. Her eyes flashed, but the wagons were already rolling. I watched the pack house shrink behind, watched the forests I'd grown up hiding in fade down to dots on the horizon, and I did not look back. The road took 3 days. 3 days of jolting along in the supply wagon, eating dried meat and hard bread, sleeping curled up on rough sacks. The guards ignored me completely. The king never once checked to see if I still lived. It should have been humiliating. It was the freest I'd ever felt. Because for 3 whole days, no one expected a single thing from me. No one looked at me with disgust or with pity. No one reminded me of the emptiness where my wolf should have been. I was no one traveling nowhere, and no one was exactly who I'd always wanted to be. On the evening of the 3rd day, we came over a ridge and I saw the capital. I had never seen anything like it. The city spread across the whole valley like something alive and breathing. White stone and dark timber. Markets that glowed gold with lamplight. And rising above all of it, catching the last of the sun, and throwing it back in shades of fire and blood the palace. It was beautiful. But as we passed through the gates, something snagged at the edge of my notice. The lower levels were different, darker. The beautiful white face of the place stopped at the ground and went no further. Whatever lay beneath did not want to be seen. The wagon stopped in a small side courtyard. A sharp-faced woman in gray appeared, looked me up and down, and let her lip curl. "This is the one, then." A guard nodded. "Follow me." I climbed down stiff and aching, and she led me through a side door down a narrow stair and into the underground. It was vast, carved out of the bedrock under the palace itself. Corridors branched off in every direction, lit by torches that guttered and smoked. The air was cool and damp, and it smelled of wet stone and something else underneath. Something metallic, old blood. "You'll work the lower kitchens," the woman said, brisk as a slap. "You'll sleep in the servants' quarters. You'll not speak unless you're spoken to. You'll not go above ground without permission. And you will never ever go near the king's private chambers." She put a weight on that last part. Her eyes bored into mine. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Someone will show you your quarters. You start at dawn." And then she swept away and left me standing alone in the corridor. I waited for someone to come. No one came. The minutes stretched. The torches hissed. And slowly, the way you feel a change in the weather, before you understand it, I realized I was not alone. Faces had appeared in the doorways along the corridor. Servants, I told myself, though they moved with a strange liquid smoothness. They stared at me, and I couldn't read their eyes at all. Not hostile, not welcoming, just wary, curious. like they were trying to decide what exactly I was. "You're the singer." I turned. A young woman, maybe 20, dark skin and darker eyes. The one who made the king go still. Word travels fast. "I'm Elowin. I know who you are." She stepped closer, studying me the way you study a thing that isn't behaving the way it should. "What I don't know is why you're here. The king doesn't bring guests to the lower levels." "I'm not a guest. I'm a servant. Servants don't ride in on the king's own caravan." Her eyes narrowed. "And servants surely don't arrive under the king's protection." My breath caught. "I don't have his protection." "Then why?" she said slowly. "Did he call a full assembly this morning, before you even got here, and forbid anyone in this palace from laying a hand on you? Said anyone who touched you would answer to him. Personally." I stared at her. "So I'll ask you one more time," she said. "Who are you, really?" "I'm no one," I whispered. "I'm just—" A scream tore through the air. We both froze. It came again, raw, agonized, barely human, and it was rising up from somewhere deeper in the underground, somewhere far below us. The young woman grabbed my arm. Don't ever go toward those sounds. Don't ask what makes them. Don't even let yourself think about it." "But someone's hurt. Someone's always hurt down here." Her voice had gone grim, flat. "This is where the king keeps his monsters." She started to pull me away, and I resisted, my heart hammering. "What do you mean?" "Monsters." She looked at me then, and her face held something almost like pity. "You really don't know, do you? You don't know what the king is, Ishwa. He's an alpha. He's cursed." She said it low, like the word itself might bite. "And you just walked into his cage." Another scream, closer now, and underneath it, threading up through the stone, a sound that stood every hair on my body straight up. A roar that was not quite wolf and not quite man. Something else. Something wrong. She dragged me down a side corridor into a small room with a few narrow cots. "Stay here. Don't leave until morning. And for the love of the moon, goddess." She paused in the doorway. "Don't let your curiosity get you killed." She shut the door. I heard the lock click, and I was alone in the dark, listening to something scream through solid rock, and I finally understood. The king hadn't rescued me. He'd locked me in. I didn't sleep. How could I with those sounds crawling through the walls? Screams that cut off all at once. Roars that shook fine dust down from the ceiling. And under everything, a steady, rhythmic pounding, like something enormous, throwing itself against a door over and over and over, testing the edges of its cage. I sat on the narrow cot and hugged my knees to my chest and tried not to think about what the young woman had said. Cursed. What did that even mean? Alphas were powerful, yes, but they were still wolves, still bound by the same nature as the rest of their kind. Unless the king was something else entirely. Dawn came eventually. I felt it more than saw it. The screaming finally stopped, and in its place came an exhausted, terrible silence. The lock clicked. The door opened. An older man stood there. Gray hair. Kind eyes that had clearly seen more than any pair of eyes should have to. "Come. You'll work the lower kitchens. Stay close to me, and don't speak to anyone." He led me back through the maze, and in the torchlight I could see more of it now. Scratch marks gouged deep into the stone walls. Doors reinforced with black iron. Chains bolted to the ceiling in places hanging empty. This was not a servant's quarters. This was a dungeon. His name was Halvard. He set me to work, peeling, scrubbing, hauling water up from the deep wells. and numbing, endless work. And I was grateful for it, because it was safe, and it was quiet, and no one mocked me for the wolf I didn't have, until the whispers started. He's asking for her, but it's only been one day. He asked for the singer, by name. My hands went still in the wash-water. Halvard appeared at my elbow, his face grim. The king wants to see you. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. He led me up instead of down this time. The rough stone smoothed into polished marble. The smoking torches became bright crystal. We were rising up out of the dark into the palace proper, into the light. We stopped before great double doors of black wood carved all over with wolves and moons. "Remember," Halvard said quietly, "whatever he asks, answer him honestly. The king values truth above everything, even truth that cuts." "What does he want with me?" His face gave nothing away. "That's between you and him." Then he knocked once, pushed the doors open, and gently guided me inside. The doors closed behind me with a sound like the lid of a coffin settling into place. The king stood at a window with his back to me, city light pouring gold across his shoulders. He was dressed simply now. Dark trousers, a white shirt open at the collar, his black hair loose. He looked almost like a man, until he turned around, and those pale eyes locked onto mine, and the whole room seemed to bend a little toward him. "Sit," he said. I sat, mostly because my legs had stopped being reliable. He studied me for a long moment in silence. "Do you know why I brought you here?" "To serve in your household, Your Majesty." "No." He crossed to the great desk and leaned against it, arms folded across his chest. "I brought you here because your voice did something I did not think was possible anymore." I waited. I didn't trust myself to speak. I heard the Luna hymn 100 times, sung by Lunas, by high priestesses, by singers trained since childhood. It is always the same, perfect and empty, a performance. His gaze never once left my face. "You made it real. You made me feel something." And there was something raw underneath the words now, something he was fighting to keep buried. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, you reminded me what it was like to want." The silence stretched between us thin and dangerous. "Why?" he asked at last. "Why did you sing it that way?" I could have lied, could have handed him something soft and diplomatic and safe. But Halvard's voice was still in my ear. "The king values truth, because I have nothing else." My voice came quiet, but it didn't shake. "No wolf, no mate, no future. All I have is the ability to understand beautiful things I will never be allowed to hold. So when I sing about love and bonds and blessings, I swallowed, I sing about grief, because that is all those words have ever meant to someone like me." He went very still. "You believe you have no future. I know I don't. Your Majesty, in our world everything I am adds up to nothing at all." And his voice, when it came, had dropped to something low and dangerous. "Is that what they told? That your whole worth comes down to what you can breed, and what animal happens to be sleeping in your bones?" "It isn't what they told me." I met his eyes. "It's what they showed me, every single day, for 23 years. He pushed off the desk and came closer, not to threaten, deliberate, slow. "And yet here you are," he said, "still standing, still surviving. That takes a kind of strength most of the wolves in that hall will never need to find." His mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost. Then it faded, and his face turned grave. I want to make you an offer, Eloan. But first you need to understand exactly what you would be agreeing to. Dread pooled low and cold in my stomach. What kind of offer? He walked to the window and stared out over his city. And when he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled, like a man walking on ice. I am cursed. You've heard the whispers already, I'm sure. The servants always talk. What they don't know is the shape of it, or how it came to be. He turned back to me, and in his eyes was something I had not expected to find in an alpha king. He looked for just one moment afraid. I am not simply an alpha. I am split, divided, two souls sharing one body. He gestured down at himself. In the daylight I am this, a man, reasoning, ruling. But when the sun goes down, his jaw tightened. I become something else, a beast that does not think like a man and does not reason like a wolf. Only rage and hunger and chaos barely held inside its skin. My breath came shallow. The screaming you heard last night, he said. That was me, throwing myself against warded walls because the other half of me wants to tear through this palace and everything living in it. The only thing that keeps my kingdom safe is that prison under the ground, and the old magic that locks me inside it once the sun is gone. I should have run. I should have been terrified. But all I felt rising up unbidden was a strange and horrified tenderness. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to stay. He said it simply. Not as a servant, as something else, a companion. Someone to talk to while I'm still myself. Someone to... He hesitated, and I watched this powerful, terrifying man struggle for the words. Someone to remind me that I am still a man at all. I don't understand what you're asking. He opened a drawer in the desk and drew out a small box. When he opened it, candlelight caught on a silver ring set with a single moonstone, pale as milk glowing like caught starlight. The curse has conditions, he said quietly. I stay split until someone can love both halves of me. The king and the beast. Not one or the other. Both. His eyes came up to mine. I have tried Eloan. For 5 years I have tried. I have courted nobles, invited scholars, consulted witches. No one can see past the monster. The moment they witness what I become at night, they break, or they run. So what are you asking me? I'm asking you to try. Stay here. Talk with me in the daylight. And at night, when I am the beast. He set the box down on the desk between us. Just survive me. Stay in the room. Don't run screaming. That's all. In exchange for what? Safety. A purpose that isn't scrubbing pots in a dungeon. He paused. And a chance to matter. To save someone. Even if that someone is me. It was madness. Complete, unvarnished madness. You could kill me, I said flatly. The magic binds me. I cannot harm you unless you first try to harm me. The cage holds. But something flickered in his voice, a shadow of doubt. Usually, I won't lie to you. There is risk. But there is risk in the servants' quarters, too. In the wild territories. Everywhere for someone like you. At least here the risk means something. I looked at the ring, glowing softly in its little box. He wasn't asking me to love him. I was asking me to endure him, and in return I would matter. Just a little. Just enough. I have one condition, I heard myself say. His eyebrows rose. You're negotiating. With a king. You brought me here because I was honest. So honestly. If I'm going to spend my nights locked in a room with a monster, I want something that's mine. Not payment, not protection. Something real. What? Teach me. I held his gaze and did not let it drop. In the daylight when you're a man. Teach me history, politics, the whole world beyond pack territory that I was never allowed to learn. Let me use that library. I nodded at the shelves lining every wall, hundreds and hundreds of books. Let me be more than I was. He studied me for a long, long moment, and then slowly he smiled. A real one. The first I'd seen. That's your price. Knowledge. That's my price. He picked the ring up out of its box and turned it over in his fingers. This is not a mating bond, he said. It's a promise. A symbol of the agreement between us. You wear it, and every wolf in this palace knows you are under my hand. That no one touches you, speaks against you, or harms you in any way. And in return, I stay with you at night, and I try not to run. And in the daylight, I teach you. He held the ring out toward me. Do we have an accord? I looked at the moonstone. Silver white, like a piece of the moon herself had fallen out of the sky and into his hand. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was the first time in my entire life that someone had offered me something worth more than my body or my bloodline. I held out my hand. He slid the ring onto my finger. My right hand, not my left, because this was not a marriage. It was something else. Something with no name yet. The metal was warm from his skin. It fit like it had been made for me. There's one more thing, he said quietly, his hand still holding mine. Before you agree, you should know what you're truly facing. Words can't capture it. Then show me. His eyes darkened. You'll regret asking that. Show me anyway. He let go of my hand and stepped back. Very well. Tonight after sundown, Halvard will bring you to my chambers below. You'll see what I become. And then, he paused. Then you'll decide whether you can truly do this. I've already decided. No. He shook his head gentle, almost sad. You've decided based on my human face and a promise of books. Wait until you've seen the truth of me. And then choose. Because that was the whole thing, wasn't it? That was the deal the world kept making with me over and over. See the worst of it first, and then choose. I looked down at the ring on my hand, the little captured moon, and for the first time in 23 years, I was not afraid of choosing. I was only afraid of hoping. They came for me at sundown. Halvard led me down past the kitchens, down past the servants' quarters, down into sections of the underground I hadn't known existed, where the stone grew older and darker and was carved with symbols that made my eyes ache just to look at them, sideways. We stopped before a door unlike any other, black iron, reinforced with silver, covered all over in runes that pulsed with their own dim light, like something breathing. Beyond this door is the king's night chamber, Halvard said. His voice had gone very soft. Once you go in, it seals until dawn. You cannot leave. He cannot leave. Whatever happens in there, stays in there. Until the sunlight breaks the spell. My hand was shaking. I hid it behind my back. There's a stool inside. A pitcher of water. A blanket. Stay in the corner farthest from the cage. Don't approach the bars. Don't speak unless he speaks first, though. I'll be honest with you, child. Most nights, He can't speak at all. He turned to face me full on. And whatever else you do, don't show fear. Fear wakes the predator. Fear is what it hunts. Don't show fear, I repeated. While I'm locked in a room with a monster. That should be simple. He almost smiled. The king believes you're different. That you might survive this. He sighed, and the sound was heavy with years. I hope he's right, because he deserves peace. And if anyone can hand it to him, maybe it's someone who knows what it is to be looked at like a monster themselves. Before I could answer, the door swung open. The chamber was large, 30 feet across, maybe more. Half of it was plain stone floor. The other half was caged off floor to ceiling by the same silver-etched iron as the door. And inside the cage, still human, stood the king. He'd changed into rough clothes. Loose trousers, no shirt. His hair was already coming wild around his face, and his eyes had a fevered brightness that hadn't been there in the daylight. When he saw me, something crossed his face. Relief and regret, both at once. "You came," he said. His voice was already rougher than before. "I gave my word. You can still leave. Halvard, take her." "No." I stepped all the way into the chamber. Behind me the door swung shut, and I heard the locks slam home one after another, deep and final. "I'm staying." He gripped the bars, and I saw his knuckles were already changing, the bones sliding under the skin, the nails darkening and lengthening into something that wasn't nails anymore. "It's starting," he ground out. "Eloan, listen to me. Whatever I say, whatever I do, I'm not fully myself. The beast thinks differently. It knows I want something. It doesn't understand what. It might try to—" He broke off with a gasp and doubled over. And I watched frozen against the far wall as his body began to come apart. Not like a wolf shifting. There was nothing clean in it, nothing natural. His spine arched at an angle no spine should reach. His bones cracked and folded. His skin rippled like something underneath it was trying to claw its way out into the air. And he screamed. The sound was neither man nor wolf. It was something caught between the two, something in the pure center of agony, and I pressed myself flat against the cold stone with my heart slamming, and I did not look away. Then the king was gone, and the beast stepped forward into the light. It was enormous. 7 feet, even hunched, covered in dark fur that seemed to drink the torchlight instead of catching it. Its face was wolf-like and wrong, too aware, too intelligent. Its eyes glowed the same pale color as the king's, but feral now, burning with something barely leashed, and it was staring straight at me. The beast circled inside its cage. Its movements were liquid, unhurried, the walk of a thing that has all the time in the world and knows it. Then it spoke, and, oh goddess, it could speak. Little songbird. Its voice was a low rumble that I felt in the floor of my own chest. "You stayed." I couldn't answer. I could barely breathe. It pressed up against the bars. The silver hissed against its skin, smoke curling up, but it didn't flinch back. "I can smell your fear. It tastes like honey and thunder." "I'm not afraid," I lied. My voice came out as a thread. The beast laughed, a terrible sound. "Liar, but a brave one." It tilted its great head, studying me. "He wants you to love us, both of us. As if anyone could love this." "What do you want?" The beast went very still, and then slowly it sank down into a crouch, still watching me through the bars. "Tell me a riddle," it said. Of all the things I had braced myself for, that was not one of them. "What? A riddle? A puzzle? A question with no easy answer. Its eyes gleamed. If you want to live through the night, little songbird, give me something to think about, instead of how easily you break. My mind raced. A riddle. It wanted a riddle. And out of nowhere, out of some buried corner, I remembered the stories I used to write. The fairy tales where clever girls survived impossible nights on their wits instead of their strength. I took a shaking breath. I am given, but never taken. I can be broken, but never held. I bind two souls, but I have no form. I met its burning eyes. What am I? The beast's eyes narrowed. It rose. It began to pace the cage muscles rolling under fur. Clever, it growled, handing me a puzzle, when you are the puzzle I'm trying to solve. And it spent the next hour circling, muttering, snarling every so often in pure frustration. But it didn't try the bars again. It didn't threaten me again. It was thinking, and slowly, impossibly, I felt my own terror begin to loosen its grip on my throat. Because this thing was a monster, yes. But it was also curious, and clever, and maybe desperately, achingly lonely. I don't know the answer, the beast finally admitted, sounding almost sulky. Tell me. No, I said quietly. But ask me again tomorrow night. Maybe I'll tell you then. The beast's eyes snapped to mine, and for just a heartbeat, I saw something completely human looking out from behind them. Surprise and hope. Tomorrow, it agreed. Tomorrow, little songbird, and you'll bring me another one. Maybe. You will. But there was no threat in it now. Almost play. Almost. We spent the rest of that night like that. Me in my corner. The beast in its cage. Both of us suspended in a strange and careful truce, held up by nothing but a question about a promise. When dawn finally cracked through the high windows and the light came pouring in, I watched the beast convulse again, shrinking, reforming, becoming a man. The king collapsed to the floor of his cage, gasping, and I grabbed the blanket Halvard had left and moved carefully toward the bars. Your Majesty, he looked up at me, and his human eyes were wide with disbelief. You're still here. I gave my word. You survived. He sounded lost. How? I found myself smiling. It surprised me as much as him. I gave him a riddle. And for the first time since I'd met him, the king laughed. A real one, rough and cracked and full of wonder. A riddle, he repeated. 5 years. 5 years of trying everything. And the answer was a riddle. The lock slid open. Halvard rushed in, stopped dead, when he saw the two of us whole and breathing. Same time tomorrow? I asked. The king stared at me like I'd rearranged the stars. Same time tomorrow, he agreed. And I walked out of that chamber wearing a promise ring, carrying something I hadn't held in years. Purpose. The day began to fall into a shape. Mornings belonged to the king. History. Philosophy. The slow tangled web of alliances that held the kingdom together. He taught me to read maps, to follow trade routes, to see the threads of debt and loyalty and old grudges that ran under everything. But more than that, he listened. When I asked a question, he didn't wave it off as stupid. He turned it over. Sometimes he stopped and reconsidered something he'd believed his whole life because of the way I'd asked it. You think differently, he said one afternoon after I'd argued with him about the way a certain war was recorded. Not like someone trained in the schools. You see angles the scholars miss. Because no one ever taught me what to think, I said. I only ever had myself to figure it out with. He looked at me a long moment. That may make you worth more than any scholar in my court." The word settled somewhere warm in my chest and stayed there. The afternoons were mine. I lived in the library, working my way along the shelves, filling in 23 years of holes. And every evening, when the sky bled gold and red, I went back down into the dark, back to the beast. And it remembered me now. It waited for me. It had its riddles ready, because yes, the beast started trading them back, testing my wit, throwing puzzles at me across the bars. I have cities, but no houses, forests, but no trees, water, but no fish. What am I? A map, I said at once. Too easy. But it sounded pleased. Try this. I speak without a mouth. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive on the wind. What am I? I thought for a while. Let it sit. An echo. Clever songbird. The approval in its voice was almost tender. You're learning. So are you. You're speaking more. Longer thoughts. Because you give me things to think about. Besides rage and hunger. It settled onto the cage floor, watching me with those pale, burning eyes. The king wonders if you're curing him. And you, I know better. That stopped me. You're not curing us, the beast said. You're teaching us we were never as broken as we thought. I wrote it down, because I'd started bringing a journal, tracking every night. Every riddle, every scrap the beast let slip. Turning my nightmare into a study. It was the only way I knew to survive a thing. Take it apart and understand it. Then on the 7th night, the beast said something that changed everything. It didn't come to the bars right away. It stood in the center of the cage, staring down at its own claws, flexing them. Do you want to know what I am? It said. What I really am. You're the beast, the cursed half. The rage he has to hold inside. That's what he tells himself. Its voice dropped low. He's wrong. I'm not his rage, little songbird. I'm his heart. I looked up sharply. Everything he feels, but won't allow himself to feel. It went on. Every soft thing, every longing, every moment, he's afraid he's too broken to ever be loved. He locks it all down in the daylight behind the logic and the crown. And at night, it comes out. As me. My breath caught in my throat. He thinks I'm the monster. The beast's eyes glowed brighter. But I'm not the monster. I'm the truth. I'm the love that has nowhere left to go. Then what does he feel? I whispered. About me. The beast studied me for a long, long moment. Dangerous question, little songbird. I'm asking it anyway. It tilted its head. Hope and terror, and something that frightens him more than I ever could. It turned away. Ask him yourself. Now, give me my riddle. We stared at each other across the cage, and the thing hanging between us had no name at all. And I understood then that I was in far deeper than I'd meant to go. Because somewhere in 7 nights of riddles, I had stopped being afraid, and started Goddess help me started to care. I did not tell the king what the beast had said. How could I? I'm his heart, the love that has nowhere to go. You don't just hand a man his own hidden heart across a breakfast table. You don't say to a king, the thing you've spent 5 years locking underground is only your own tenderness still trying to find a way out. So I said nothing. And I taught. And I learned. And I went down into the dark every night. But something had shifted in me. I'd catch him watching me in the library, and I'd feel the back of my neck go warm. He'd correct my hand on a map and his fingers would brush mine, and I'd forget the name of the city I'd been pointing at. Which was ridiculous. Which was dangerous. Which was the kind of foolishness that got girls like me broken again and again. And I knew that I knew it, and I couldn't stop. Halvard noticed first, of course. Old men always do. He found me in the kitchens one morning humming. Me. And he set down the bowl he was carrying and looked at me with those tired, knowing eyes. "You're happy," he said, like it was a diagnosis. "I'm allowed to be happy." "You are." He paused. "Just be careful whose happiness you build yours on top of child. Kings can afford to break their toys. The toys usually can't afford it back," which was cruel and true. And I hated him a little for saying it. But I couldn't stop. It was on the 12th day that the past came walking back into my life. I was in the library when Halvard appeared at the door, his face carefully arranged into nothing at all, which by now I'd learned to read as bad news. "You have a visitor, Miss Elowen." "I don't know anyone here." "You know these two." And my stomach dropped straight through the floor. Because I did know. Before he even said the names, I knew I could feel it, the way you feel a cold draft come under a door. My father. And Seraphine. They had come to the capital. They found me in the receiving room off the Great Gallery, and for one horrible moment, we all just stood there. My father looked older than he had a fortnight ago, more gray at the temples, and Seraphine was staring at the ring on my hand. "So it's true," she said. "The whispers, the one they threw away under royal protection. What are you doing here?" My father cleared his throat. "The king sent no word, but word travels, that my daughter had risen, that she had the king's ear. His favor." He tried to smile, and it looked like something a corpse would do. "I came to see for myself, and to congratulate you, of course." "You came to see if you could use it." The words fell out of me flat and hard, and I watched them land, and I did not take them back. Because that was the truth of it. That was always the truth of my father. He hadn't crossed 3 days of road to see his daughter. He'd crossed it to see an opportunity, but it was Seraphine who worried me. Because Seraphine wasn't looking at me with contempt anymore. She was looking at me with something worse, something calculating. She was looking at the ring and the fine gown I'd been given, and the way the servants had bowed when I passed, and I could see the wheels turning behind her lovely, hateful face. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. "Do what?" "This." She gestured at all of it. At me. You. With everything the world said you'd never be worth. How did a thing like you end up wearing the king's ring while I... She stopped herself. But I heard it. The wound underneath. While I stand here with nothing at all. "I was myself," I said. "That's all. I didn't pretend to be you." Her eyes flashed. And in that flash, I saw everything I needed to see. Because Seraphine had spent her whole life being told she was the prize. The silver wolf. The beautiful one. The one every alpha would fight to claim. And she had come all this way, expecting to find her broken half-sister, exactly where she'd left her, at the bottom in the kitchen in the dark. Instead, she'd found me risen. And a woman like Seraphine could not survive that. Not without doing something about it. "Well," she said, and her voice had gone smooth and pleasant, which frightened me far more than her fury ever had. "How lovely for you, sister. Truly." She smiled, and I felt the temperature of my whole new life drop 10 degrees. The rumors started 3 days later. I don't know exactly how she did it. Seraphine was a guest of the crown. By then, she and my father lodged in the visitors' wing. Waiting, she said sweetly. For the wedding season, though there was no wedding, and a beautiful she-wolf with a silver pelt and a honeyed tongue could go a great many places, a servant could not. But I know it was her, because the whisper had her fingerprints all over it. Have you heard the one from the borderlands? They say it isn't natural what she's done to him. They say she has old blood, witch blood. They say she's put something on him, bewitched him. How else does a nothing bring an alpha king to heal? He forbade anyone to touch her. He calls for her by name. He teaches her alone for hours. Does that sound like a king in his right mind, or a king under a spell? I first heard it from the young dark-eyed woman, whose name I'd learned by then was Pell. She caught me in the corridor, glanced both ways, and pulled me into an alcove. "You need to hear what they're saying about you," she said. "Below stairs and above." And she told me. And I felt the floor tilt, because here was the cruel genius of it. There was no way to disprove a rumor like that. If I fought it, I looked guilty. If I ignored it, it grew. And the deeper part, the part that made my blood run cold, it fed on the very thing that had saved me. The strangeness that Torvald found precious, the court could twist into proof of something dark. The very thing that made me valuable to him, made me suspect to everyone else. "Who started it?" I asked, though I already knew. Pell's mouth thinned. A silver she-wolf, visiting, very lovely, very free with her opinions in the ladies' baths. Of course. I found Seraphine in the gardens that evening, and I did not bother with pleasantries. "Stop it." She turned all wide-eyed innocence. "Stop what, sister? The whispers, the witch talk. Stop it before it does real harm." "I don't know what you mean." She trailed her fingers over a rose. "But if people are saying things, well, perhaps they're only saying what they see. A girl with no wolf, a cursed king who suddenly can't bear to be parted from her. It does look strange, Eloan. You must admit. You're going to get me killed." And here, her mask slipped, just for a second. And what showed underneath it wasn't the cartoon cruelty I'd grown up with. It was something rawer, older. "You were nothing," she said, low and fierce. "Do you understand that you were the thing they used to make me feel better about my own life? However bad it got, at least I wasn't you. That was your purpose, Eloan. That was the only use you ever had. And you don't even have the decency to stay put." I stared at her, because for the first time in 23 years I saw it clearly. Her cruelty had never been about me at all. It had been a mirror she held up to make herself look tall. And now I'd walked out of the frame, and she had nothing left to measure herself against, and it was killing her. I almost pitied her. "I'm not going back in the box, Seraphine," I said quietly. "I'm sorry. I know you need me down there. But I'm not going back." I walked away, and I felt her eyes on my back the whole way, and I knew the way. You know a storm is coming from the color of the sky, that she was not finished with me. The witch talk cost me. I felt it in the corridors first. The bows got shallower. The servant's eyes slid away from mine. A councilman I'd never spoken to looked at me across the great hall with open suspicion, and I heard the words, "Old blood," float back to me on the draft. Torvald noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "Something's changed," he said one morning, closing the book we'd been reading. "You're frightened. You've been frightened for days. Tell me." So I told him. Not who I didn't say Seraphine's name, though he must have guessed, but what. the whispers, the witch blood, the idea taking root in his court that I had bewitched him. He was quiet for a long moment. "They'll believe it," I said, "because it's easier than the truth. It's easier to believe I trapped you with dark magic than to believe you might simply—" I stopped. I couldn't finish that sentence. "It's easier. Let them talk. They're saying I should be burned, Torvald." That got him. His head came up sharp. "No one," he said, and his voice had gone to iron, "is going to touch you. You can't guard me every hour of every day, and you certainly can't guard me at night." I gestured helpless at the whole impossible situation. At night you're in a cage, and I'm the only one they think would go near it. And every night, I do go near it. Do you see how that looks? Do you see the story they can tell? He saw it. I watched him see it. And I watched something dark and helpless move behind his eyes. And I realized that even a king, even an alpha king who could break iron with his hands, was not powerful enough to stop a story once it started to run. "There's something else," I said. Because there was. Because I hadn't been able to stop turning it over. The witch talk. It's a lie. But it made me Torvald, it made me start wondering. Wondering what? Why me? I stood restless, pacing his study, the way the beast paced its cage. Why can I stand in that room every night when nobody else could? Everyone who came before me broke or ran. But I don't. It doesn't touch me the way it touched them. Why am I different? He didn't have an answer, but I saw the question take hold of him too. And that night, I asked Halvard. I found the old man in the deep kitchen alone, banking the fires down for the night, and I asked him straight out, because I'd run out of gentler ways. "Halvard, you've been here longer than anyone. You know things you don't say. So I'm asking you plainly. Is there any reason at all that I might be able to survive that room when others couldn't?" He went still, and I knew the way you know when you've stepped on a floorboard that's about to give, that I had touched something. "Halvard." He set down the poker, wiped his hand slow on his apron, and when he looked at me, his kind old eyes were full of something I couldn't name. "Sit down, child." I sat. "When you first came," he said, "the king had me pull the healer's records on you, from your old pack. He wanted to know what he was dealing with, a girl with no wolf walking calm into a beast's cage. It didn't make sense to him. It didn't make sense to me either." My heart had started to pound. And I read them. Every page. The examinations from when you were small. The findings. Wolfless. Barren. Defective, that was the word they used more than once. His jaw tightened at that, an old anger. But there was one line alone, buried near the end, in the hand of a healer who'd since died, and whose name I didn't recognize. What did it say? He looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding something, like he was standing at the edge of a thing and choosing whether to jump. "It said your wolf was not absent." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "It said your wolf was sealed." The word landed in the middle of my chest like a stone dropped into still water. Sealed. That's not... My mouth had gone dry. "That's not the same as absent. That's a seal can be broken. A seal was put there. On purpose. By someone." "Yes," Halvard said quietly. "My wolf isn't missing." The room had started to tilt. 23 years. 23 years of the word broken, of the word worthless, of being the thing they used to make Seraphine feel tall. My wolf was taken. Hidden. Someone locked her away when I stopped. When the record was dated. You'd have been 3 years old, maybe 4, 3 years old. Someone had reached into a small child and locked away her whole animal soul, and then let the world call her broken. For 2 decades, and let her father look at her like a stain, and let her sister use her like a footstool, and never once, "Who?" I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Who did it? I don't know. The record doesn't say. Halvard hesitated, and then he reached into his apron and drew out a folded square of paper, worn soft at the creases, like he'd been carrying it a while deciding. But the healer sketched the seal, copied it down before it faded from where it was set. I don't know what it means, but I thought you had a right to see it, to know your own body at least, since no one ever gave you that. He unfolded the paper and laid it on the table between us. It was a mark, a sigil, interlocking circles and a slashing line drawn in a spiral that made my eyes want to slide off it. And I stared at it, and my whole life rearranged itself around it, and I could not breathe. I took that sketch to the one person in the palace I'd come to trust with a dangerous thing, not the king. I couldn't take it to the king. Not yet. Because if I was something other than what everyone believed, if there really was old blood in me, sealed away, then Seraphine's poison rumor stopped being a lie, and I couldn't put that in Torvald's hands until I understood it myself. So I took it to Councilwoman Ottoline. She was one of the few at court who'd shown me nothing but a level measuring respect. Older than my father. Silver-haired, sharp as a winter morning, a woman who'd survived 4 decades of palace politics by knowing precisely which things were true and which were merely useful. She'd cornered me once after a council session and told me without warmth but without cruelty that I was cleverer than half the men in that room, and I ought to stop apologizing for how I'd risen. I found her in her chambers, and I laid the sketch on her desk, and I said, "I need you to tell me if you know what this is, and I need you to not repeat that I asked." She looked at it, and I watched the color drain out of her face, which I want you to understand I had never once seen happen to Ottoline. Not when the Eastern Pax threatened war. Not when a rival poisoned her wine and she'd had to have her own daughter taste it. Nothing moved that woman. This moved her. "Where did you get this?" she said very quietly. "It was drawn off my body when I was a child. Do you know what it is?" She was silent for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. "I've seen this mark twice in my life," she said at last. "Once in an old suppression warrant from the days before the council drove the witches out of the territories. It was the personal sigil of a witch, a working mark, a signature if you like. They each had their own." "Whose?" Ottoline looked up at me, and in her sharp old eyes was something I had never expected to see there. Fear. "There was a witch," she said, "the most powerful of the last generation before they were hunted out. She vanished into the wild years ago and was never found. Some say she died. Some say she's still out there watching." "Councilwoman, whose sigil is it?" "It's hers," Ottoline said. "The witch called Vesna." The name meant nothing to me, but I saw from the way Ottoline said it, from the way her hand had gone flat and white against the desk, that it meant a very great deal to her. That it was a name people did not say lightly. A name attached to something enormous. "Who is Vesna?" I asked. "Why do you look like that?" And Ottoline was quiet again, weighing. And then she said the thing that broke my whole understanding of my life clean in half. "Eloan," she said. "The witch whose mark is sealed into your body. Vesna. She is the same witch who cursed the king." The room went silent. I heard my own blood in my ears. because it wasn't chance. None of it was chance. Not my voice that stopped a king. Not the calm that let me stand in a beast's cage when everyone else fled screaming. Not the way the two of us seemed to fit against each other's broken edges, like two halves of the same shattered thing. The same hand had touched us both. 20 years apart, one in the wild territories, one under this palace. The same witch had reached into a 3-year-old child and sealed away her soul. And then, years later, had reached into a young king and split his soul in two. And now by roads, neither of us had ever chosen that child, and that king had ended up in the same room, trading riddles across the bars of a cage. I was not a stranger who'd stumbled into Torvald's story. I had been part of the curse from the very beginning. I don't remember walking back to my rooms. I remember standing at the window, though, watching the moon come up over the city. That same pale moon. The whole world worshipped the moon that was supposed to bless the mated and the whole. And I remember thinking, whoever you are, Vesna, wherever you are, you did this. You sealed me. You cursed him. You wove the two of us together before we ever drew breath in the same room. And I am going to find you. And you are going to tell me why. But I didn't get the chance to go looking. Because the storm I'd felt coming, the storm in Seraphine's eyes in the garden, it broke before I was ready. It broke 3 nights later in the great hall at the full moon feast in front of the whole assembled court. I was standing at the edge of the room, the way I always did prison, but small. When Seraphine rose from her seat, lifted her lovely voice so it carried to every corner, and said the words that would decide everything. Your Majesty, before we eat, I feel I must speak, out of love for this court, and concern for our king. The hall went quiet. Torvald's face went to stone. There is a creature living among us, Seraphine said, and she turned slow, and she looked straight at me, and she smiled. A girl with no wolf. A girl who can bear no child. And now it seems a girl marked with witch's blood. She has our king's ear, our king's ring, our king's protection. She let it hang, and I ask this court plainly, is that the free choice of a king in his right mind, or is our king bewitched? Every face in the room turned to me, and I understood that the box Seraphine wanted to put me back in was not the kitchen anymore. It was a grave. And I stood there in the silence, and I felt the whole weight of my old life come rushing back. The kitchen, the dark, word defective spoken over a small child. 23 years of learning to make myself invisible of learning. That the safest thing I could do was disappear. Disappear, said every instinct I had. Look at the floor. Make yourself small. Let the king save you. Except I was so tired of being saved. So tired of being the thing other people decided the shape of. My whole life, someone else had held the pen. My father, Seraphine. The healers who called me broken. Even Torvald, in his way, he'd claimed me, protected me, drawn a circle around me with his crown. And I was grateful. But a woman who lives inside another person's circle is still living inside a cage. And I was done with cages. So I did not look at the floor. I walked forward instead. Out of the shadow at the edge of the hall. Into the light. And every wolf in that room watched a girl with no wolf in a plain gown walk to the center of the floor and stop and lift her chin and refuse for the first time in her whole life to be small. You want to know if the king is bewitched, I said. My voice carried, clear. It surprised me. It always surprised me. My own voice, the way it filled a room that wasn't supposed to have space for me in it. You want to know how a girl the world threw away has the king's ring. So let me tell you. Not the king. Me. Seraphine's smile flickered. Because this wasn't the script. In the script I wept. In the script I begged. In the script I ran. And my running was the proof of my guilt. I did none of it. You call it a spell, I said, turning slow, letting my eyes move across the whole assembled court. Court the councilmen, and the ladies, and the alphas in their finery. Because you cannot imagine any other reason a king would choose me. And I understand that. I do. Because for 23 years I couldn't imagine it either. I stopped. I let it land. You've all heard what I am. No wolf, no child in me, not ever. In our world, that's the same as saying worthless, isn't it? A woman is worth what her body can make. A pup, a pelt, a place in the ladder of fang and claw. And by that arithmetic, I am worth nothing at all. Nobody moved. So here is what I want to ask this court. Every one of you. When did we decide that a person is only worth what they can produce? When did we decide that a woman who cannot bear a child, or cannot become a beast, has no soul worth keeping? My voice cracked on the last word. I let it crack. I didn't hide it. Because I have spent my whole life being measured by the one scale I could never tip. And I am telling you, all of you, that the scale is a lie. I did not bewitch your king. I turned and looked at Torvald, at his pale eyes fixed on me from the high table, at the man who had bent silver in his hands the first time he heard me sing. I saw him. That's all. I looked at a man everyone else was too frightened to look at, and I did not turn away. The hall was so quiet I could hear the torches breathe. That is not magic, I said. That is only what any of us could do. If we were brave enough. If we stopped measuring each other by what we can be used for, and started measuring each other by what we are. And then I did the thing that could have gotten me killed. I turned to face the whole court, and I said it out loud, the thing I had not even said to him in the dark. I love your king, both halves of him, the man who rules you in the daylight, and the thing you lock underground at night and call a monster. My voice was steady, now steady as stone. I know what he becomes. I've sat with it night after night, and I choose it. I choose all of him, not despite what he is. Because of it. Somewhere in the hall, a woman was crying. I heard it. I didn't look to see who. Seraphine's face had gone white. She admits it, she said, but her voice had lost its silk, gone thin and desperate. She admits she has old blood. Which blood? The mark is on her. Ask her about the yes. The word dropped out of me like a stone into a well, and the whole hall gasped, and I felt Torvald half rise from his chair. Yes, I said again, before I could lose my nerve, before the fear could climb back up my throat and shut me down. There is a mark on my body, a witch's seal set into me when I was 3 years old. I only learned it 3 days ago. I don't know who did it. I don't know why. I looked out at all of them. But I'll tell you what I do know. Whatever was done to me, I didn't ask for it. A child of 3 doesn't ask for anything. Everything you've all decided I am, everything you built on top of that word defective. You built it on top of something that was done to me by someone without my knowing. And you never once asked whether it was my fault. You just decided I was less, because it was easier than looking closer. My voice had gone very quiet now, but it carried all the way to the back of the hall. You've all been so busy asking what's wrong with me. Not one of you ever asked what was done to me. And that, I let out a breath. That is the real spell in this room. Not the one on the king, the one you cast on me, all of you, when I was too small to fight it. Nobody spoke, and into that silence from the great doors at the back of the hall came a voice, carrying with it a cold that had nothing to do with the season. She's right, you know. Every head in the room whipped around. An old woman stood in the doorway. I didn't know how she'd gotten past the guards. I didn't know how anyone got past the guards. But there she was, small and stooped, wrapped in a traveling cloak, the gray of old ash. Gray-streaked dark hair falling loose around a face lined deep as tree bark. And her eyes. Her eyes were the same pale color as his, and I knew. Before anyone said a word, I knew the way you know a face you've never seen, but have somehow always been waiting for. Vesna. The witch moved into the hall, and the crowd fell back from her like water. Guards reached for their weapons, and then froze hands halfway to their hilts, held by something none of us could see. She walked slow, unhurried, the way the beast walked its cage. And she did not look at the court, or at the councilmen, or even at the king on his high seat. She looked at me. 20 years, she said softly. I have been watching for 20 years. And here you are, all grown up, standing in the middle of a room full of wolves telling them the truth about themselves. Something moved across her ancient face. Something that might have been pride, or might have been grief. You have your mother's spine. The floor dropped out from under me. You knew my mother. I knew your mother. Vesna stopped a few feet from me. Up close, she smelled of rain and cold stone and something older than either. Better than anyone left alive. Which is why, child, I am the one who sealed your wolf away. When you were 3 years old, the hall erupted. I barely heard it, because the whole world had narrowed down to the old woman in front of me, and the thing she had just said, flat and plain, like she was confessing to nothing worse than moving a chair. You, I whispered. It was you. You did this to me. Yes. You made them call me broken. You made my father look at me, like a you gave Seraphine a footstool for 20 years. You let the whole world decide I was worthless, you. My voice was climbing, cracking, and I couldn't stop it. Why? What did I ever do? I was 3. What could I possibly have done? Nothing. Vesna's voice was gentle now, and that gentleness was worse than any cruelty. You did nothing, child. You were a baby. That was rather the point. The point. Listen to me. She reached out. She did not quite touch me, but her hand hovered there, trembling old. You were not born without a wolf, Elowen. You were born with a wolf, and something else besides. Old blood, my blood. Your grandmother was my sister. The hall had gone dead silent again, hanging on her every word. Your mother married into a wolf pack, hid what she was hoped it would sleep quiet in her line. And it did, until you. You were 3 years old when your gifts began to wake. And the council in those days was hunting witch blood through every pack in the territories, dragging children out of their beds because they were afraid of any power they could not put a collar on. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a much younger woman inside the old one, a woman burning with an old, old beige. They would have found you. They would have taken you. A 3-year-old girl torn from her mother because of what was in her blood. And they would not have been gentle. I could not breathe, so I made a choice. Vesna's voice dropped. I sealed you. All of it. the witch blood and the wolf tangled up with it. I couldn't take one without the other. They were grown through each other, like roots. I locked it all away deep, where no hunter's test would ever find it. And to the world, you became nothing. Empty. Broken. Her eyes glistened. Unwanted. And do you understand why I let you be unwanted, child? Because the council does not hunt what nobody wants. The safest thing in the world in those years was to be a girl that no one valued at all. And there it was. There was the whole ruin of my life turned over in one breath to show its other face. Because the wolflessness that had made my father ashamed of me, the barrenness that had made me disposable, the word defective that the healers wrote over a small child's body, all of it had been a shield, a blanket thrown over a flame so the wind wouldn't find it, the thing I'd spent 23 years grieving as my curse. It had been keeping me alive the whole time. The barrenness I managed, that too. A part of the seal, a wall between you and your own body. When the seal lifts, Vesna paused. That door may open again as well. I don't promise it. But I don't close it either. I heard distantly the sound of the whole court holding its breath. You watched, I said. 20 years. You watched them treat me like, and you never. I watched, she said, and now the tears did come sliding down the deep lines of her face unashamed. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have done hard things. I watched them make you small. I watched your father turn from you. And every single time I asked myself if it was time to come back to unseal you, to tell you the truth. And every single time the danger was still there, and the answer was no. Stay hidden. Stay unwanted. Stay alive. Her voice broke. I am so sorry, child. I traded your happiness for your life. It was the only trade I had. But I have never once stopped being sorry for it. And I looked at this old woman weeping in a hall full of wolves, and something in me that had been clenched into a fist for 23 years began very slowly to open. Then Torvald stood, and the whole hall turned, because when an alpha king rises, the room rises with him. He came down from the high table, slow, his gaze never leaving the witch's face, and I braced myself. Because here was the woman who had split his soul in two, who had condemned him to 5 years in a cage, standing 3 feet from him, unguarded. And I did not know what a king does with the person who cursed him. Vesna, he said, and his voice was terrible in its quiet. You cursed me. 5 years. 5 years of coming apart every night at sundown, of throwing myself against warded stone, of watching every soul I let close to me break or flee. His hands had curled into fists. You did that to me. And now you tell me you also, that she and I are both. He couldn't finish it. Why? Whatever I did, what could I possibly have done to earn all of it? And Vesna looked at him, and her old face crumpled. You executed my daughter, she said. The words fell into the room like stones into deep water. Her name was Margaret. She was 17 years old. Vesna's voice shook, but did not stop. She used the old magic to try to save her dying brother. She took life from others to give it to him. 3 people died so that one might live. The law was very clear. And you. She looked at the king, and there was no hate in it now, only an exhaustion, 20 years deep. You were 19, newly crowned, your council watching to see if you would be weak. And so you did what was expected. You ordered her death, and you watched it done. Torvald had gone very still, and I saw on his face something I had never seen there. Not the king. Not the beast. The boy of 19 who had signed an order because grown men in a council chamber were waiting to see if he'd flinch, and who had carried it ever since. "I remember her," he said hoarsely. "I have never once forgotten her. Not one night since." "I know," Vesna said. "I know you haven't. That was the curse, you see. Not the beast. The beast was only the shape of it." She stepped closer to him, unafraid. "I did not curse you to make a monster, Torvald Ashgrove. I cursed you to make you understand. I split your soul in two, so that you would know in your own flesh every single night what it feels like to be torn apart from the ones you love. What it feels like to lose half of yourself and be told it's justice." She let out a long breath. "And the way out, the only way out I built into it, was that you had to find someone who could love both halves of a broken thing, who could look at what the world had thrown away and choose it anyway." Her gaze slid slow to me. I did not know when I cast it who that someone would be. I only hoped that somewhere in this cold sorting measuring world there was one soul who understood what it was to be split and unwanted, and could love past it. The whole hall understood at the same moment. I heard it move through them like wind through grass. Because there was only one person in all the world who had been unmade by the same hand that unmade the king. Only one soul, sealed and hidden and called broken. Only one girl who had walked into a beast's cage, armed with nothing but riddles, and had not run. She'd cursed him years after she sealed me, and she'd built the cure out of the exact shape of the wound she'd already put in me. "You made us for each other," I whispered. "No." Vesna shook her head. "No, child. I would never claim that. The moon goddess makes mates. Old women only nudge." A ghost of a smile. "I sealed you to save you. I cursed him to teach him. That the two of you should find each other across 20 years, across all that distance, and see in each other the one thing no one else could see." Her voice went soft with wonder. "That I did not do. That was the two of you. That was your own two brave broken hearts, finding the one door in all the world that fit." And then she reached into her cloak and drew out a small glass vial. It caught the torchlight and held it, and inside it, something silver moved, luminous, like a piece of moonlight had been poured into glass. "I came here for two things," Vesna said. "To confess and to offer." She held the vial out to me on her open palm. "This is essence of moonlight, very old, very rare. The one working I never dared attempt for anyone but you." Her ancient eyes met mine. "If you drink it, child, it will break my seal. All the way. Your wolf will wake. Your body will mend. Or it may. The witch blood will rise. Everything I locked away in a frightened baby 20 years ago, it will come home to you at last." The hall gasped, and I looked at that vial. "And I want you to understand what it was. What she was holding out to me on her old, trembling palm. It was everything. It was the wolf I had wept for 1,000 nights. It was the running I had never done. It was maybe a body that could carry a child. A future I'd been told was ash. It was the end of every single thing they had ever called me. It was the answer to the prayer I had prayed my whole life. Take it. Every instinct in me screamed it. Take it, take it. You have wanted this since before you had words for wanting." And I looked at it glowing there. And I thought about a small, cold room at the edge of a pack house and a girl feeding her fairy tales into a fire because she was walking into something real. and I thought about the king's voice the first time. It requires having nothing else. And I thought about what I'd just said out loud in front of the whole court. When did we decide a person is only worth what they can produce? And I heard the trap in it. Soft, beautiful, nearly invisible. Because if I drank it, if I took the cure, then everything I'd just said became a lie. Then I hadn't been enough, after all. Then I was only worth loving once I'd been fixed. Then defective had been the truth all along, and this was just the correction, and the whole court could go back to sleep believing exactly what they'd always believed. That a broken thing has to be mended before it's worth anything, and I would know it. Every day for the rest of my life, I would know that when the moment came, I hadn't believed my own words either. My hand rose toward the vial, and stopped. "No," I said. The word came out so quiet that for a moment I didn't think anyone had heard it. Then it rippled outward through the hall, and I heard the whole room inhale. Vesna's eyebrows lifted slow. "No, no," louder now, steadier. "Thank you, truly. I know what you're offering me. I know what it cost you to make it, and what it would give me. And My voice caught. I pushed through it. There was a girl who would have snatched that vial out of your hand and drunk it dry before you finished the sentence. She wanted it so badly it was the shape of her whole life. I was that girl for 23 years. I looked out at the court, at Seraphine frozen and forgotten at the edge of it all, at my father, gray-faced, at Ottoline watching me with something fierce and bright in her old eyes, at Torvald. "But I stood in this room a few minutes ago," I said, "and I told all of you that a person is worth more than what their body can make. That the scale is a lie. That you don't have to be fixed to be enough." I turned back to Vesna. "And if I drink that now, I make a liar of myself, in front of everyone. I say the words don't count for me. Only for other people, I say I needed to be mended after all." I shook my head. "I'm not broken. I never was. I was hidden, and I was hurt, and I was lied about, but I was never broken. And I am not going to let a miracle be the thing that finally convinces me I was." My voice dropped. "I would rather be as I am and whole than mended and a liar." And I closed her fingers gently around the vial, pushing it back toward her. "Keep it," I said, "or don't. But I don't need it to be complete. I already am." The silence in that hall was the deepest I have ever stood inside. And then Vesna began to laugh. It was a strange sound, cracked and wet, half a sob, and she wiped at her streaming eyes with the back of one old hand. And she laughed like something 20 years knotted was finally coming loose. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, child. Oh, you magnificent girl." She looked at me, and the wonder on her face was almost frightening. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "Refused a gift, I think," I said, rudely. "You passed the test." She was still laughing, still crying. "The last one. The one I never told anyone because it couldn't be told. Because the moment it was known, it couldn't be true. The curse had 3 locks, King, not 2. She turned to Torvald. "The first someone must love both halves of you. She did that in the dark night after night with her riddles. The second that love had to be true. Not for power, not for a crown. And that—" She gestured at me, at all of it. "She stood in front of your whole court and proved that with her life on the line. And the third," Torvald said, very low. "The third." Vesna's voice went soft as falling snow. "The one that was never yours to pass my king. It was hers." She looked at me. "That the one who loved you had to first love herself. Broken pieces and all. had to look at everything the world had thrown away in her and refuse to be fixed. Because you cannot teach a man to stop measuring souls by their usefulness. Her voice broke, with a woman who only believes in her own worth once she's been made useful again. The vial. She'd never meant for me to drink it. The vial was the test. And I had so nearly. You would have taken it, Vesna said, reading my face. If you had. It would still have worked mind. Your wolf would have woken. But the curse would have stayed. Forever. Because the whole thing turns on this child. The whole thing. Everything I built into it in 20 years of grief. A broken thing does not have to be mended to be beloved. And you had to know that in your bones. Not just say it. Know it. Enough to turn down the moon. I felt Torvald move. And then his hand was in mine, and I turned and his eyes were wet, an alpha king weeping openly in front of his own court. And not one soul in that room dared to think less of him for it. Eloan, he said, and light exploded through the hall. Not fire. Nothing that burned. It poured up out of Torvald where he stood white and blinding and clean like a sunrise breaking loose from behind a mountain. And I threw up my free hand to shield my eyes. And I did not let go of him. I would not let go of him. I gripped his hand through all of it, and I heard over the roar of it a sound I had heard 100 times in the dark below. The beast. But it wasn't screaming. It was... I have no better word for it. It was sighing. A great, shuddering, endless exhale. The sound of something that has been holding its breath for 5 years. Finally, letting it go. The sound of a thing coming home. The light guttered, dimmed, faded, and when I lowered my hand, Torvald stood before me. Just Torvald, whole and human and singular, his chest heaving, his eyes wide, with a shock so total it looked almost like fear. He looked down at his own hands, flexed the fingers that should have been claws by now. Because the sun had long since set. Because it was full dark outside those windows. And he should have been in his cage. He should have been coming apart. And he wasn't. It's gone, he whispered. He pressed a hand flat to his own chest over his heart, and his voice cracked completely. The beast, I can feel it. It's not caged anymore. It's not separate. It's just... He looked up at me, and the tears spilled over. It's me. It's just me. All of it. I'm whole. I know, I whispered. How does it... He shook his head, dazed. 5 years. How does it feel to be one thing again after 5 years? I don't even have the... Like waking up, I said. He let out a laugh that was mostly a sob. Like waking up, he agreed. Like coming home to a house I forgot was mine. And he pulled me into his arms in front of the entire court. And he kissed me. And I felt the whole hall around us break not into fear, not into whispers, but into something I had never once in my life been on the receiving end of. Into cheering. But that wasn't the last of it. Because as we stood there, wrapped in each other, something began to happen inside me. It started as warmth, low in my chest, right where I'd carried the grief all these years, right where the fist had finally opened. And then it spread, down my spine, out through my arms. A heat a-stirring, a presence arriving in a body that had been empty for as long as I could remember. And I gasped. Torvald felt it and pulled back alarmed. Eloan what? But Vesna was already stepping forward, and her old face had gone soft with awe. The seal, she breathed. Child, the seal is. I felt it break. Not painfully. Not the way the king's transformation tore at him. It was more like a knot slipping loose. Like a door that had been swollen shut for 20 years, suddenly gently swinging open on a room you'd forgotten was full of light. And she woke. My wolf. I felt her the way you feel someone come into a room behind you. That certain knowing. She'd been there all along, sealed, sleeping silent for 20 years, locked in the dark of my own body. And now she stretched and shook herself and turned her head and looked out at the world through my eyes for the very first time. I put a hand over my mouth. I was crying. I didn't know when I'd started. But I didn't drink it, I said. I didn't take the vial, how? No, Vesna said, and she was crying too, and laughing that same broken, wondering laugh. No, you didn't. That's the whole of it, child. That's the marrow of the thing. She reached out, and this time she did touch me, one gnarled old hand against my wet cheek. My seal was never a lock, not really. Not at the deepest level. It was a wall I built out of a lie the world told you that you were worthless, that you were nothing. As long as you believed that lie, the wall held. That was what kept you hidden. That was what kept you safe. She smiled through her tears. You didn't need my moonlight to break it. You needed to stop believing you were nothing. And you did that yourself. Just now, in front of all of them. You looked at everything they threw away in you, and you called it enough. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The wall was made of your own smallness, Elowen, and you finally stood up. I stood in the center of that hall, a king's arm around me, a witch's hand on my cheek, my own wolf waking warm and real inside me. For the first time in 20 years, and I understood something I will carry to the end of my days. That the cure I'd wanted my whole life was never going to come from a vial or a spell or a man or anyone else's hand. The cure was the moment I stopped agreeing with the people who'd called me worthless. The rest comes quickly now. Seraphine. I looked for her after, in the swirl of it all, and found her at the edge of the hall, staring at me. And the fury I'd braced for wasn't there. What was there was worse. Emptier. Because she'd built her whole self on being the silver wolf, the prize. The one who at least wasn't me. And she'd just watched the girl she'd used as a footstool for 20 years wake her own wolf break a king's curse, and be cheered by the very court Seraphine had tried to turn against her. I could have had this, she said when I reached her. So quiet, I almost didn't hear it. If Father had put me forward that night. If I'd been the one asked to sing. No, I said. And I wasn't cruel about it. I was past cruel. I only felt tired and a little sad for her. You'd have sung it perfectly, powerfully, the way it's meant to be sung. And it would have meant nothing, Seraphine, because you've never once in your life had to hope for something you couldn't have. You can't grieve what you've never been denied. I looked at her, this beautiful, ruined sister of mine. He didn't need perfect. He needed someone who understood what it was to be broken. And that was never going to be you. She had no answer. For the first time in our 2 lives, Seraphine had no answer. My father, when I found him, would not meet my eyes, and I discovered that I no longer needed him to. I'm not going to punish you, I told him. I'm not going to have you thrown out or shamed or ruined. You'll go home. You'll live your life. I paused. But you will not be in mine. Not because I hate you. I don't anymore. I'm too full to have room for it. But because a man who looked at his child and saw a stain that man doesn't get to stand in the light of what she became, Go home, father. And he went, stooped, silent, older than I'd ever seen him. And I felt nothing snap in me. No triumph. Only a quiet and a closing, and the strange soft grief of finally setting down a weight you've carried so long. You'd forgotten. It wasn't part of your body. Vesna I found last on the great steps of the palace, wrapped in her ash-gray cloak, looking out over the city as the moon climbed. You're leaving, I said. My part is done. She turned to me. I came to confess, and I've confessed. I came to make an offer, and you were wise enough to refuse it. A dry, warm smile. There's nothing left for an old woman to do but go home and finally rest. Margaret, I said, your daughter. I'm sorry for what happened to her, for all of it. The witch's face crumpled and steadied. So am I, she said. Every day. That wound will never close, child. Some don't. You learn to carry them is all. You build the rest of your life around the shape of them. She looked at me, and then past me, to where Torvald stood in the doorway whole. But I came here expecting to find that all my grief had made was more grief, more broken things, more pain passed down the line the way it always is. She let out a long breath, and instead, I found this. Two people the world called ruined, who put each other back together. Not by fixing what was cracked, by loving it, cracks and all. Her voice went soft. That's not something I made. That's something you did. And it's the first thing in 20 years that's made me believe the future might be worth more than the past. She reached up, and she pressed one dry old kiss to my forehead. Live well, child of my sister's line, she whispered. Build something out of the wreckage, and know that somewhere in the wild, an old woman is watching. And for the first time in a very long time, she's glad. And then she stepped down into the dark of the city, and the shadows folded around her, and she was gone. I never saw her again. But I felt her, sometimes, in the years that came after, on the full moon running the ridge above the capital, on 4 legs at last, my wolf silver. As it turned out, silver as Seraphine's, silver as the moonstone on my hand. I would catch now, and then a scent on the wind that was rain and cold stone, and something older than either. And I would lift my head and howl to it. And I like to think somewhere out there she heard. A year later, we married. Not because a curse required it. Because we chose it in front of a court that had learned to bow to me before my wolf ever woke, and bowed no less deeply now. And the healers, the palace healers, the good ones, the ones who asked what happened to you before they ever said what's wrong with you. They told me gently that the wall Vesna spoke of had come down all the way, that the door was open, that the future they'd once called Ash might someday hold a child after all. I wept when they told me, not because I'd needed it to be true to be whole. I'd already learned that lesson in a hall full of wolves with a vial of moonlight held out on an old woman's palm. I precipitate because it was one more thing they'd told me I could never have handed quietly back. But I want to tell you the truest thing before I go. If that door had stayed closed forever, if my wolf had never woken, if the seal had held, if I'd lived out my whole life exactly as they'd found me, I would still have been enough. I know that now, all the way down. In my bones, the ones they had held no destiny, because worth was never written in my bones at all. It was written in the moment I stopped letting other people hold the pen. And that, my dears, that is a story with a happy ending after all. Just not the one they promised me. A better one,